Jesus reveals the word that breaks anxiety. Peace starts tonight. Have you ever felt like you're trapped in a silent storm inside your mind? As if there is an incessant voice that whispers doubts, fears, and insecurities as you struggle to find a moment of peace? You smile at the world, but inside, it's like you're sinking into a sea of thoughts that won't let you breathe. You try to be strong. You try to hide your despair, but no one seems to see what's really happening inside you. Anxiety is like a constant shadow chasing you, stealing your peace, destroying your dreams, and maybe you've already tried everything. Words of comfort that seem empty, distractions that don't last, advice that only makes you feel even more lost. You pray, but the silence seems deafening. It is as if God were distant, as if his words were lost in the void, and you start to wonder, am I alone? Does no one understand the pain I carry? But what if I told you there was an answer? That there is a word capable of breaking this chain of anxiety that imprisons you. A word so powerful that it can transform your heart and calm your mind like nothing else can. Few people know this truth. Few understand the power of this word, because it's not just a passing consolation. It's not just a nice phrase. It's a living truth, a promise that was spoken thousands of years ago and that echoes to this day, crossing time and reaching your heart now. You are not here by chance. You are not hearing this message by coincidence, because Jesus reveals to you that there is a word that has the power to break all anxiety, all worry, all fear that consumes you. But before revealing this truth, I want you to allow yourself to open your heart. Take a deep breath. Feel every word, because what you're about to discover could be exactly what you've always been looking for. A light in the midst of darkness, a peace that is not of this world, a voice that has the power to silence all others. You are here because Jesus brought you to this message. It wasn't by chance. It wasn't a coincidence. It is as if in the midst of so many paths, you were guided by an invisible hand, taken directly to this moment, because there is something that God wants to speak to your heart. Maybe you have carried a pain that no one sees, an anxiety that consumes you inside, even if on the outside you try to appear strong. Maybe you felt alone, lost, in thoughts that won't leave you alone, wondering if anyone really understands what you're going through. But Jesus reveals to you that he knows you deeply, every thought, every tear, every silent scream of your soul. And today, he wants to bring peace to your heart. Now I want you to do something. It's not just a video. It's not just a message. This is a spiritual encounter. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel each word, because what you're about to hear has the power to transform your life. And if you feel that this message has already started to touch your heart, I ask you to leave a like now. It's not just any gesture. It's a way to spread this word of hope to other people who are suffering like you. Each like is like a light that lights up in the darkness, reaching other lives. And if this message is already speaking to you, comment below, Jesus, I need you. Write this sentence as a declaration of faith, as a cry that breaks the silence. Because by doing so, you not only declare your faith, but you also inspire others to do the same. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, I invite you to subscribe now. Because here you will find words that strengthen your soul, messages that bring you closer to Jesus, and revelations that can change your life. Jesus reveals to you that you are not alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video. Maybe it's the answer this person is looking for. Because when you share God's word, you become a light in someone's life. Don't leave yet. Take a deep breath. Open your heart. Because Jesus has something very important to reveal to you now. Even when words seem to lose their meaning and silence becomes a crushing weight, there is something you need to understand. Because this pain you carry, this anguish that tightens your chest, is not the end. And even though everything seems to be falling apart around you, there is a truth that few know, a promise that has the power to transform your life. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell you about now. Imagine Peter, a man who knew Jesus, who had seen miracles with his own eyes, but who now found himself in the midst of chaos. The waves roared like angry monsters, the wind cut like blades, and each splash of cold water was a reminder of their fragility. Peter was in a boat, but the boat was no longer a safe place. He was a prisoner floating in the darkness, surrounded by a storm that never seemed to end. Have you ever felt this way? Lost, out of control, as if you were sinking in the midst of your fears? Peter tried to stand his ground. Their eyes searched for Jesus, who walked on the water, but the fear was stronger. The sound of the wind, the rocking of the boat, the darkness that surrounded him, everything screamed louder than his faith. And it was at that moment when his feet began to sink that panic took over. The icy waters enveloped his legs, his chest tightened, and despair swallowed him. "Lord, save me!" he shouted. And that wasn't just a sentence. It was an outcry, a choked scream of a soul drowning in fear. Have you ever seen yourself like this? As if every step you try to take is just another reason to sink? As if every thought was a wave that dragged you further away from peace? Peter knew Jesus, but in that moment, he knew something even deeper, his own weakness, because that's what anxiety does. She makes you forget the truth. She makes you believe that you are alone, that there is no way out, that fear is stronger than any hope. But then, something happened. Amidst the chaos, a hand reached out, strong, firm, safe, the hand of Jesus. And with a voice that cut through the wind and the storm, he said, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" These words were not an accusation, but a revelation, because fear only has power when you forget who you can truly trust. And maybe that's what you need to hear today, that even when all seems lost, when despair seems to swallow your soul, there is a hand reached out to you. Jesus reveals to you that, in the midst of the storm of your anxiety, there is a peace that goes beyond understanding, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, but on His presence. But perhaps you still feel that peace is far away, that even knowing this truth, your heart continues to race, your mind continues to scream, because anxiety is treacherous. She doesn't just scream lies, she whispers that you are alone. But what if I told you that the biggest mistake you make is believing this lie? That the real battle is not against fear itself, but against the idea that you have to face it alone. Peter only began to sink when he looked away from Jesus. And perhaps, right now, you are doing the same. But today, Jesus reveals to you that it is time to fix your eyes on Him again, because it's not about the strength of the storm, but about who is with you in the middle of it. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment and feel this truth. You are not alone. You never were. And this storm that seems to overwhelm you is no greater than the power of one who walks on the water. Jesus reveals to you that even when the wind blows and the waves roar, there is a peace that passes all understanding, a peace that does not come from the absence of problems, but from His presence. And that presence is here now, as you hear these words. But I want you to be honest with yourself. How long will you allow this anxiety to control your life? How long will you continue trying to fight alone when the hand of Jesus is outstretched to rescue you? Maybe it's time for you to cry out like Peter, "Lord, save me!" Not as a last option, but as an act of faith, because He who created you knows every fear that torments you. He knows the nights you cry in silence, the emptiness that no one sees, the pain you hide behind a smile. But today, something may change. If you choose to believe, if you decide to trust. Because Jesus reveals to you that the word that breaks your anxiety is not a hidden secret. It's a simple but powerful truth. I am with you. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to believe that He is bigger than any storm, that He is peace in the midst of chaos, that when everything seems lost, He is the safe shelter. And I want you to comment now, "Jesus, I trust in you." Not as a simple sentence, but as a declaration of faith, because this word has the power to transform your life. If this message spoke to your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share with someone who needs to hear this. Enjoy this video as an act of faith, so that this word reaches other lives. And if you're not registered yet, be part of this journey. Here you will discover that in the midst of the storm, there is a voice that calms, and that voice is Jesus. But make no mistake, what you've heard so far is just the beginning, because what comes next will reveal something many never realized, a truth that can change your life forever. You're about to discover might be exactly what your heart is searching for. And even when it seems that despair takes over, there is a truth that few know, a truth that spans the ages, a promise that has the power to break the invisible chains of your mind. Have you ever wondered why, even though you know so many answers, your heart still carries an emptiness that seems unbearable? Maybe it's because you've never found the answer that truly fills your soul. But today, something is about to change. Imagine a dark night where the silence sea missed to scream and the wind howls like voices of fear. Here was Elijah, a prophet of God, but now just a man on the run. Tired, desperate, he ran to the desert, that place where the heat suffocates during the day and the cold consumes at night. He hid under a juniper tree, a lonely tree, as dry as his soul at that moment. Elijah no longer had any strength. He was exhausted from fighting, from trying, from believing. With a crushed heart, he whispered a prayer that many know, but few have the courage to admit. "It's enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my parents." Have you ever felt this way? As if every attempt was in vain? As if every hope was just another weight on your shoulders? As if the whole world was silent, and even God seemed distant? Elijah knew the power of God. He had seen fire come down from the sky. He had felt the voice of God in his heart. But at that moment, all he felt was emptiness, a dark abyss that seemed to have no end. And then, in the midst of his despair, something happened. Elijah fell asleep, hoping he would never wake up again. But instead of the end, he found care. An angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." When he opened his eyes, he saw warm bread and water beside him. God did not rebuke him, did not accuse him, did not abandon him. He fed him. Because even when you feel like you don't deserve it, God's love reaches you. Even when you want to give up, He sustains you. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. You have been carrying a pain that no one sees, a tiredness that is not just physical, but an exhaustion of the soul. You smile at the world, but inside it's like you're silently screaming. You've tried to be strong, you've tried to believe, but now everything seems too heavy. And that is where God's truth reveals itself. Because when you reach the end of your strength, that's where He starts to act. When you think there is no way out, He tells you, "Get up and eat." And you may ask, but why doesn't God end this pain once and for all? Why do I have to go through all this? Because sometimes the desert is not the end. It's the place where you encounter God's care in ways you never imagined. It's the place where you discover that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong all the time. You just need to trust. Take a deep breath. Let this truth sink into your heart. What you are facing today is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a transformation. Because Jesus reveals to you that even in the desert, there is warm bread prepared for you. There is fresh water to quench your thirst. There is a voice that tells you, "Get up, because there is still a way to go." And if you feel like no one cares, if you feel like you're alone, I want you to know that's a lie. Because Jesus sees you. He sees your tears that no one knows, hears your choked screams that no one notices, and He is here now, reaching out to you. But the decision is yours. Will you continue to believe the lie that there is no way out? Or will you accept the care He offers you? Elijah thought he was alone, but he wasn't. He thought his life was over, but it was just beginning. And you? How long will you hide under the shadow of pain when there is a table prepared for you? Jesus reveals to you that there is a strength that you have never experienced, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a hope that is not based on what you feel. But I want you to do something now. Don't let this truth be just another word you hear and forget. If this message is speaking to your heart, write in the comments, "I arise in the name of Jesus." It's not just a sentence, it's a statement of faith. It is your cry for help. It is your cry for help, and it is the beginning of your victory. If this word touched your soul, Enjoy this video as an act of faith, because each like is a way of spreading this message to other lives that need this same peace. And if you're not registered yet, be part of this journey. Here you will discover that even in the desert, there is a voice that sustains you, a voice that tells you, get up, because there is still a purpose for you. But don't think this is the last revelation, because what you'll hear next is even more powerful, a truth that can change everything. Don't leave, because what's about to be revealed could be what you've always been looking for. And even when it seems like God's silence is deafening, there is a truth that few realize. Because in the darkness of doubt, He works in silence, refining the heart that cries out for answers. And there is no story that shows this more powerfully than that of Job. Job was a righteous man, faithful to God in everything he did. He had a prosperous family, health, and wealth. But in a single moment, everything was taken away. His children died, his possessions disappeared like smoke in the wind, and his health was destroyed by painful sores that covered his body. And, as if the physical pain wasn't enough, God's silence became an even more suffocating prison. Job looked to the sky, cried out for answers, but all he received was the echo of his own anguish. Imagine him sitting, covered in ash, scratching his wounds with shards of pottery, while his friends, who were supposed to comfort him, accused him, saying that he must have committed some terrible sin to deserve that suffering. Where is your God now, Job? Has he abandoned you? These words echoed in Job's mind like a storm, and even in the midst of divine silence, something in his heart refused to give up. Job did not understand why he suffered so much, but he did not turn away from God. He cried out, "Behold, I go forward, but he is not there. I return, but I perceive him not. Yet he knows the way I go. If he proves me, I shall come out as gold." Job 23:8-10. But have you ever felt this way? Alone, screaming to the heavens, and all you get is silence? Have you ever had times when you prayed with tears streaming down your face, but the only answer was overwhelming emptiness? Maybe you're facing God's silence right now, wondering if He cares. But what few realize is that sometimes God's silence isn't rejection, it's preparation. Job didn't know it, but there was a spiritual battle going on behind the pain he was experiencing. Satan believed that Job only served God because of his blessings, but God saw something deeper in the man's heart. Silence was not abandonment, it was a test, a process. For gold is not purified with gentle words, but with the intense heat of fire. And that is exactly what often happens to us. In God's silence, He is not far away. He is refining us. Every tear you shed, every prayer that seems unheard, it's all building something in you, a faith that does not depend on immediate answers, but on an unshakable trust in who God is, even when everything seems to say otherwise. And the most incredible thing? God's silence did not last forever in Job's life. In the end, God not only spoke, but restored him in an extraordinary way. Everything Job had lost was returned double. Your children, your wealth, your health, everything has been restored. But the most valuable thing he received was not what the eyes could see, but a profound revelation of who God was. He said, "My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes see you." Job 42:5. In the end, the silence that tortured him so much became the soil where his faith flourished. And now I ask you, do you really believe that God is silent because He doesn't care about you? Or is He refining you, preparing something that your eyes cannot yet see? In the comments, I want you to write, "I believe even in silence," because this is the faith that transforms. And if this message touched your heart, leave a like and share. Your simple gesture could be what God uses to reach someone who is feeling exactly like you. But what many don't know is that God's silence is just the beginning, because there is a power in His words that can break through even the deepest anxiety. And when you discover this truth, everything can change. And even when the mind doesn't rest, when worries seem like a storm that never ceases, there is a truth that few see. Have you ever felt like your mind never turns off? That even when you try to rest, thoughts surround you like raging waves? Martha knew that feeling. She wasn't in a literal storm, but one that was even more intense, the storm of her own worries. Martha was a dedicated woman, always taking care of everything and everyone. His house was crowded as Jesus had arrived as a guest. But while her sister Mary was at Jesus' feet, listening to every word with her heart at peace, Martha was running from one side to the other. Dishes, food, tidying up, everything seemed urgent. And with every moment, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders grew. His mind wouldn't stop. What if there's no food? What if the guests don't feel well taken care of? What if Jesus thinks I don't care about him? It was as if each thought was a drop that overflowed the cup already full of his anxiety, until, in a moment of frustration, Martha couldn't take it anymore. She interrupted Jesus and, with an agitated heart, said, "Lord, don't you mind that my sister lets me serve alone? Tell her to help me." Luke 10:40, a plea, almost an accusation. Martha was so overwhelmed that she couldn't tell who was in her house. The Prince of Peace himself, and Jesus, with love and gentleness, looked at her and replied, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and worried about many things, but only one is necessary." Luke 10:41-42. But have you ever stopped to think about what Jesus really meant? He wasn't ignoring Martha's efforts. He wasn't saying the service was wrong. What he saw was something deeper. Martha was so busy doing that she had lost her being. His mind was so full of tasks that there was no room for peace. How often do you feel this way? Even when you try to rest, your mind is always in motion. Worries, fears, doubts. It's as if peace is always a distant promise, something you can't achieve. But what Martha didn't realize was that the peace she needed so much was not in the completed tasks, but in the presence of Jesus. Because it is not absolute control that brings rest, but surrender. Have you ever noticed that you often hold on to control, thinking that if you don't do everything, everything will go wrong? That if you don't worry, it's like you're being irresponsible? But what if I told you that this constant worry is not a sign of responsibility, but of a lack of trust? That while you try to control everything, you distance yourself from the true peace that only Jesus can give. Jesus was showing Martha, and today, you, that there is something more important than controlling every detail of life. It's being at his feet. Because when you put your concerns before Jesus, he doesn't just listen, he transforms. It takes the weight you carry and replaces it with rest. Martha needed to learn that the world wouldn't collapse if she stopped for a moment. And do you also need to hear this today? Have you been carrying a weight that is not yours? Have your worries become an invisible prison that prevents you from experiencing peace? Jesus reveals to you that rest is not the absence of problems, but his presence. He is not calling you to ignore your responsibilities, but to understand that even in the midst of your task, your heart can be at peace. Because peace is not the result of a perfect day. It is the fruit of perfect trust. But now I want to ask you, how long will you live carrying the weight of everything alone? How long will you allow your mind to be a battlefield of worries? In the comments, I want you to write, "I choose to rest in Jesus," because this is the decision that transforms. And if this message touched your heart, leave a like and share. Your simple gesture could be what God uses to reach someone who is drowning in worries right now. But that's not all, because what you discover next may challenge everything you believe about God's love. And even when it seems like the weight of worries never lessens, there is a truth that almost no one realizes, because true peace does not come from the absence of problems, but from the presence of Jesus. And there is no story that shows this more clearly than Martha's. A woman who lived surrounded by responsibilities, always running, always trying to please, but who, deep down, was trapped in an invisible prison, the anxiety of never being enough. It was a special day. Jesus, the Master, had arrived at his home. For many, this would be a unique opportunity to be in his presence, to hear his words, to feel his peace. But for Martha, everything was an endless list of tasks. While her sister Mary sat at Jesus' feet, listening to every word, Martha ran around the house, dishes to be served, water to be brought, bread to be baked. And with each step, a new concern appeared in his mind. Is everything perfect? What if something is missing? What if Jesus doesn't feel welcomed? His thoughts were like wave, one after another, crushing his peace. And maybe you understand exactly what Martha felt, because for many, life is like that. A constant rush, an endless list of tasks that never end. You wake up already thinking about what you need to do, you sleep with your mind full of worries. And even when you try to rest, your mind won't turn off. It's as if there is always something to be resolved, something that depends solely on you. You know this weight, don't you? The weight of feeling like everything depends on you, that if you stop, everything will fall apart. But then, amidst the whirlwind of thoughts, Martha couldn't take it anymore. She stopped, looked at Jesus, and, with a heart full of frustration, said, "Lord, don't you mind that my sister leaves me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." Luke 10:40, a plea mixed with an accusation. Because deep down, Martha wasn't just overloaded with tasks. She felt alone, alone in her responsibility, alone in her effort, alone in her tiredness. And it was then that Jesus, with the meekness that only he has, replied, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and worried about many things, but only one is necessary." Luke 10:41-42. A simple sentence, but it cut like a blade, because Martha's real prison wasn't the work itself, but the fact that her heart was so full of anxiety that she couldn't see what really mattered. She had the Prince of Peace himself in her home, but her heart was at war. But what Jesus was saying to Martha was much deeper. He wasn't ignoring his effort. He wasn't saying the work wasn't important. What he saw was that Martha was trying to find meaning in doing, while the true meaning was in being. She tried to please Jesus with her actions, but she forgot that the greatest gift she could offer was her presence. And this is exactly how many live today, running, trying to control everything, thinking that peace will only come when everything is perfect. But what if I told you that this control is an illusion? That in fact, the more you try to control, the more you lose peace. Because Martha was so worried about what to do for Jesus that she forgot to just be with him. And that's what happens when you let anxiety take over. You try to fill the void with activities, with worries, with control, but nothing is enough. Because the peace you seek is not in completed tasks, but in true delivery. And you might wonder, but how can I just stop worrying? The answer is in the presence of Jesus. Because while Martha was wasting herself, Mary was at the feet of the Master. She was not ignoring the needs of the house, but she understood that the greatest food was not the bread that Martha prepared, but the words of life that came from Jesus' mouth. She chose what was necessary, not because he was irresponsible, but because he knew that true peace can only be found in him. And that is what Jesus reveals to you today, that you can be surrounded by problems but still have peace, that you may have responsibilities, but you don't need to be a prisoner of them. Because true freedom is not having control over everything, but knowing that there is a God who takes care of you, that as you rest at the feet of Jesus, he takes care of what you cannot control. But do you really believe that? Or do you still live like Martha, trying to prove your worth through what you do, trying to carry the weight of it all alone? What if I told you that this weight you carry is not yours? That Jesus is calling you to lay your worries at his feet, to trust that he is already taking care of what you cannot control? In the comments, I want you to write, "I choose to rest in Jesus," because this is a decision that changes everything. And if this message touched your heart, leave a like and share. Your simple gesture could be what God uses to reach someone who is drowning in worries right now. But what comes next is even deeper, because what Jesus is about to reveal to you may challenge everything you believed about your worth. And this truth can transform your life forever. And even when it seems like you're not enough for anyone, when the fear of rejection follows you like a shadow, there's a truth that few know. Because even when the world rejects you, there is someone who never abandons you. And this truth is revealed powerfully in the story of the Samaritan woman, a woman who, by many, was seen as unworthy, but who found in Jesus the acceptance that her soul desperately sought. Imagine the scene. It was noon, the sun was scorching, and she was walking alone towards the well. Alone, because I was tired of the scornful looks and the malicious whispers. Other women came in the morning in groups, talking, laughing. But her? She was always the exception. Avoided, judged, marked by her past. Because everyone knew his story. 5 husbands. And the man she lived with now wasn't even her husband. For many, she was just an example of what one should not be. A worthless woman. And how many times have you felt this way? As if it weren't enough for anyone? As if your past is a weight you carry, a label you can't take off? Maybe you've heard words that hurt you, phrases that were engraved in your mind like scars. You will never be good enough. No one will ever truly love you. Words that echo every time you look in the mirror, that make you doubt who you are. But that afternoon, as the Samaritan woman approached the well, she didn't know that her life was about to change forever. Because there, sitting on the edge of the well, was Jesus. And he looked at her, not with contempt, not with judgment, but with compassion. "Give me a drink," he said. A simple sentence, but for her it was almost unbelievable. A Jew talking to a Samaritan woman? A holy man addressing a woman everyone despised? But Jesus didn't just see her story. He saw her pain, her emptiness, her thirst for something the world couldn't give. And that's exactly what you need to understand. Jesus does not see you as the world does. He doesn't define you by your mistakes, your failures, or what others say about you. He sees your heart, your hidden tears, your fears that you can't tell anyone. And he continues to offer you something that no one else can give: acceptance. A love that does not depend on what you do, but on who he is. That woman, in the midst of her astonishment, began to question, "How can the Lord, being a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for water?" But Jesus responded even more surprisingly. "If you had known the gift of God and who is asking you for water, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." John 4:10. Living water. Something that satiates not just the body, but the soul. Something she had been looking for in every relationship but had never found. And how many times have you tried to fill the void? If things that don't last? Maybe you've looked for acceptance in people who only hurt you. Maybe you've looked for value in achievements, in praise, in appearance. But whenever night comes, you feel empty again, because nothing in this world can fill the space that was made for Jesus. The conversation continued, and Jesus, with love and truth, revealed something that no one else knew. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you now live with is not your husband. He knew his past, every mistake, every choice, every disappointment, and yet he didn't reject her. On the contrary, he offered new life, a life where her value would no longer be determined by what others said, but by what he thought about her. And in that moment, the woman realized that she was in front of someone who not only knew her pain, but who had the power to heal her. She dropped the pitcher, ran to the city, and without shame said to everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Is he the Messiah?" John 4:29. The woman who once avoided people was now a messenger of truth, because when you encounter Jesus, rejection loses its power to define you. But what about you? Have you been living in search of acceptance from others? Have you been carrying the weight of what they said about you? Or have you been hiding, afraid that if people really knew you, they would reject you too? What Jesus reveals to you today is that his love does not depend on your past. He doesn't reject you. He doesn't abandon you. He accepts you exactly as you are. But he loves you too much to leave you as you are. And now, I want to challenge you. Will you continue to carry the weight of rejection? Are you going to continue living as if your worth depends on the opinions of others? Or will you accept what Jesus offers you? In the comments, I want you to write, "I am accepted by Jesus," because this is a truth that can change everything. And if this message spoke to your heart, leave a like and share, because what you just heard could be exactly what someone around you desperately needs to know. But what comes next goes even deeper, because there's something about Jesus' forgiveness that few people understand. And when you figure it out, it can transform not just your life, but your past. And even when it seems like the weight of the past will never leave you alone, there is a truth that few understand. Because no matter how deep the marks that guilt has left on your heart, Jesus' forgiveness is even greater. And there is no story that shows this more intensely than Peter's. A man who knew the Master, who walked beside him, who saw miracles that many only dream of seeing. And yet, he denied. Imagine that courtyard lit only by torches, the early morning cold cutting through the air, and Pedro trying to keep warm by a fire. He was there, hidden among the curious, trying to see what would happen to Jesus, but at the same time, trying not to be seen. Fear tightened his chest. In his mind, the words of Jesus still echoed, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Luke 22:34. Pedro was sure he would never do that, until fear took over. A servant recognized him. "You were with him too," she said. Peter, with his heart racing, quickly denied, "I don't know him." Minutes later, another recognized him. "You're one of them too." And again, Pedro denied it. But it was the 3rd time that everything fell apart. Someone said, "You're definitely one of them. Your way of speaking gives you away." And in despair, Peter swore, "I don't know this man." Luke 22:59-60. At that moment, the rooster crowed, and maybe you've already felt this weight, that moment when you do something you swore you'd never do, when you disappoint someone you love, when you fail exactly where you promised to be strong, and the guilt comes like a wave, crushing your soul. Peter looked toward the place where Jesus was being judged, and the Master's eyes met his, a look full of love but also of pain, and Peter went away from there and wept bitterly, because guilt has that power. She imprisons you in an invisible cell where the screams of accusation never stop. How could you do that? You will never be worthy. You are a failure. But what Pedro didn't know was that that wasn't the end, because while he cried, while he drowned in guilt, Jesus carried a cross that was not just made of wood, but that carried the weight of all sins, all guilt, all failures, every tear of Peter's, every cry of despair, every memory that tortured him. Jesus took it all upon himself, because the love of Christ is not just a feeling, it is a sacrifice. Days later, Pedro heard something that seemed impossible. He is risen. But did that change what he had done? Could a miracle erase his betrayal? Peter still carried that weight, until the day when, at the seaside, he met Jesus' gaze again. But this time, there was no pain, there was forgiveness. "Peter, do you love me?" Jesus asked. Not once, but 3 times. And each answer from Peter was like a healing for his soul. Every time he said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you," it was as if the chains of guilt were broken. And what does this mean for you? It means that no matter what you have done, Jesus' forgiveness is greater. It means that even if you have failed, even if you have denied everything you believed in, even if you have done things that you are ashamed to remember, Jesus does not reject you. He doesn't abandon you. On the contrary, he seeks you. Because what Peter discovered that morning by the sea is that guilt can be powerful, but the love of Jesus is even more so. But I want to ask you, have you been living like Pedro that morning? Hiding, trying not to be seen, suffocated by guilt? Do you carry memories that haunt you? Voices that condemn you? Have you ever believed that there is no more forgiveness for you? That you went too far? That there is no way back? But Jesus reveals to you that forgiveness is not just a second chance. It is a new life, because when he forgives you, he doesn't just erase what you did. He transforms you. Peter, the man who denied Jesus, became Peter, the man who preached to crowds. The man who cried in shame became the man who spoke boldly. Because the same love that forgives you is the love that transforms you. But now it's up to you. Will you continue to carry this guilt? Will you continue living as if Jesus' forgiveness is something you need to earn? Or will you accept that the blood he shed is enough? In the comments, I want you to write, "I am forgiven by Jesus," because this is a truth that can break all the chains of guilt. And if this message touched your heart, leave a like and share, because what you just heard could be exactly what someone around you desperately needs to know. But what you will discover now is even deeper, because there is a truth about Jesus' forgiveness that few understand. And when you figure it out, it can transform not just your present, but your future as well. And even when it seems like forgiveness is a distant promise, there's something you need to understand. Because shame is like a shadow that haunts, an invisible weight that crushes. She makes you believe that your mistakes are all that you are. But there is a story that reveals that where there is shame, Jesus brings forgiveness and restoration. And this story begins with a woman, dragged into the middle of a crowd, exposed, judged, and condemned. The morning dust was still in the air when that woman was thrown at Jesus' feet. The screams of the accusers were like stones about to be thrown. "Master, this woman was caught in adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. And you, what do you say?" John 8:4-5. To her, time seemed to have stopped. His heart beat like an uncontrolled drum, and every look of contempt was a knife stuck in his soul. There was no escape, no defense, only shame. A shame that burned hotter than the midday sun. But what hurt most was not the judgment of those men, but his own judgment. The voice in his head screamed, "You're worthless. You're a mistake. Your life is a lie." Maybe you know this voice. The voice that condemns you for your failures, that reminds you of your mistakes, that makes you believe that you will never be good enough. Shame is more than a feeling. It is a prison. And while the crowd waited, Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground. Silence fell like a veil. What was he doing? Why didn't he say anything? Every second felt like an eternity. The men continued to demand an answer, until Jesus stood up and said, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone." John 8:7. A sepulchral silence took over. One by one, the accusers dropped their stones and walked away. The woman didn't understand what was happening. She was still shaking, until everything was silent. And then, only she and Jesus remained there. The one who could judge her, who had the right to condemn her, but didn't. He looked at her with a tenderness she had never known and asked, "Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, Lord," she whispered. And then he declared, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." John 8:10-11. Do you understand what happened there? The woman expected condemnation, but found forgiveness. He expected shame, but he found acceptance. And you? Do you live like that woman trapped in a prison of shame? Maybe your mistakes are not known to a crowd, but they are known to you. Maybe no one else sees the weight you carry, but you feel it. And the voices don't stop. You don't deserve forgiveness. You will never change. You are a failure. But Jesus reveals something powerful to you. What shame destroys, forgiveness restores. He doesn't just ignore your mistakes. He transforms your story. Because the same Jesus who defended that woman in front of the crowd is the one who stands between you and your shame. But there is something that many don't understand. Jesus didn't just say, "I do not condemn you." He also said, "Go and sin no more." Because forgiveness is more than a second chance. It's the beginning of a new life. But how is this possible? How can someone who made so many mistakes have a new life? Because Jesus didn't just talk about forgiveness. He paid the price. He took upon himself the shame you carry. Every mistake, every failure, every word you would like to forget. Everything was taken by him on the cross. And what seemed like the end, the greatest act of humiliation, became the greatest proof of love. But I ask you, what are you going to do with this forgiveness? Will you continue hiding in shame? Will you continue to believe that your mistakes are your identity? Or will you allow the love of Jesus to transform your story? That woman who was condemned by the crowd found freedom at the feet of Jesus, but she had to choose to believe his words and not the voices of condemnation. And now, it's your turn, because no matter what you have done, Jesus does not condemn you, but he calls you to something greater, to leave behind what destroys you and live the life he has for you. And you know what's most incredible? The same land where the accusers wanted to write the end of that woman was the place where Jesus wrote a new story for her. You need to understand this. Shame only has power when you believe in it. But Jesus' forgiveness is stronger. It's like the light that drives out the darkness. And if you have been trapped in shame, believing that you will never be worthy, that you will never be accepted, that you will never be loved, Jesus is calling you, not to accuse you, but to set you free. But I want you to do something now. In the comments, write, "Jesus forgives me and restores me," because every time you declare this truth, you break the power of shame over your life. And if this message touched your heart, leave a like and share, because what you just heard could be the release someone close to you is desperately waiting for. But there is something even deeper that you need to understand, because what happened to that woman is what could happen to you. And what you will discover now is the key to never being a prisoner of shame again. And even when it seems like your life has no direction, that each day is just an empty repetition, there is something you need to understand, because the despair of lack of purpose is like a shadow that grows silently, sucking your joy, stealing your peace. It's the silent scream of those who wake up every morning without knowing why they continue. But there is a story that reveals that even in the greatest darkness, God sees something in you that no one else sees. And this story begins with a young man named Gideon in hiding. It was a moonless night, and the wind blew with the smell of fear. Gideon, a young man with a heavy heart, was hiding in a wine press, a place where wheat was pressed, but which was now his refuge. He wasn't just there for safety, but because he didn't believe in himself. Trembling hands struck the wheat with desperate haste. His heart was pounding, and every sound around him seemed like a sign of danger. The Midianites had taken everything: destruction, fear, oppression. And Gideon, he saw himself as a nobody, a weakling. Have you ever felt this way? Hidden, not just from others, but from yourself. Trying to survive, but never really living? The voice in Gideon's mind was clear. You are nobody. You will never change that. You were born to fail. Perhaps these words also echo in your heart. When you look in the mirror, you don't see a winner. You see someone who is just surviving, someone the world has already forgotten. But while Gideon was there, trapped in his insignificance, something extraordinary happened. A light shone amidst the darkness, and a powerful voice broke the silence. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Judges 6:12. Mighty warrior? Was this a cruel joke? Gideon looked around, hoping that this angel was talking to someone else. He didn't see himself as a warrior, much less as someone powerful. He was just a young man, hiding, afraid, without purpose. And maybe you are exactly like that, lost in a meaningless routine, questioning your worth, believing your life is unimportant. But what you don't realize is that while you see yourself as a failure, God sees you as someone chosen, someone with a purpose you haven't yet discovered. But Gideon didn't believe it. "Ah, Lord, if you are with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are your miracles?" Judges 6:13. Have you ever asked this question? Where is God when everything seems lost? Where are the promises he made? But God did not turn away from Gideon. He looked beyond the fear, beyond the doubt, and saw what no one else saw. "Go with the strength you have and deliver Israel from the hands of the Midianites. Am I not the one sending you?" Judges 6:14. Gideon was still in shock. He, a liberator? He who saw himself as the smallest, the weakest, the most insignificant? But what Gideon didn't understand is that God never chooses the perfect. He empowers the chosen ones. Have you ever thought about this? That maybe your feeling of inability, your lack of purpose, is exactly the point where God wants to start something new? Because where you see weakness, God sees potential. Where you see failure, God sees an opportunity to show his power. And yet Gideon hesitated. He asked for signs. He asked for proof. Because when you've lived in the shadow of doubt for so long, it's hard to believe in the light. But God was patient. He confirmed his presence. He showed Gideon that he was not alone. And that fearful young man who hid in a wine press became the leader of an army. But it wasn't his strength that brought victory. It was his obedience. God reduced his army to just 300 men, so he knew that victory would not come from his ability, but from God's power. Do you understand? What started as fear ended in victory. What began as insignificance turned into purpose. And the same voice that called Gideon calls you today. You are not a mistake. You are not lost. You are not insignificant. You are someone God chose. But there is something you need to understand. God does not reveal his purpose to those who live in hiding. He calls you to come out of the darkness, to trust his voice. But how can you do this? How can you believe there is a purpose when everything seems empty? You need to listen to the voice that says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." It doesn't matter what others said. It doesn't matter what you believe about yourself. What matters is what God says about you. And he says you are chosen, loved, and called to something greater. But here's the challenge. Will you continue hiding? Will you continue listening to the voice of doubt? Or will you allow God to show you what he has always seen in you? Because like Gideon, you may be hiding, but God has already called you by your true name. Now I want you to do something powerful. In the comments, write, "I am chosen by God." Because every time you declare this truth, you weaken the lie of insignificance. And if this message spoke to your heart, click like and share. Because there are people who, just like you, need to remember that they are chosen, even when they feel lost. But wait, what happened to Gideon is just the beginning. Because there is a truth about your purpose that many ignore. And when you understand, everything will change. And even when life seems to be coming to an end, when the shadow of death seems inevitable, there is something you still don't understand. Because the fear of death is not just the fear of the end. It is the fear of losing everything you love. It is the fear of having nothing left. It is the despair of seeing life slipping through your fingers and not being able to do anything. And no one felt this fear as crushingly as Mary and Martha, when they saw their brother Lazarus being consumed by illness. It was a cruel, sunny day, but the heat did not bring life. On the contrary, it seemed as if the air itself was permeated with pain. Martha and Mary had sent an urgent message. "Lord, the one you love is sick." John 11:3. But what to do when help doesn't arrive? When you pray, wait, and nothing happens? They waited, looking down the road, hoping to see Jesus appearing in the distance. But he didn't come. God's silence seemed as cruel as the disease that consumed Lazarus. Have you ever felt this way? Praying, crying out, hoping for a miracle, and all you get is silence? Maybe you cried whole nights, asking God where he was. Maybe you felt your heart breaking into 1,000 pieces while the answer didn't come. Martha and Maria knew this. Despair. Lazarus got worse. His moans became weaker until they stopped. And then the cold of death filled the house. But what do you do when what you feared most becomes reality? How to accept God's silence? For Martha and Maria, that was the end. They had trusted in Jesus, believed in his power, but he did not come. Lazarus was buried. The crying was not just for his brother's death. It was also for the pain of a divine silence that seemed inexplicable. Have you ever felt betrayed by God? As if your prayers had been ignored? Like the sky is closed to you? Maybe you carry this pain in your heart, this feeling that your faith was in vain. But what Martha and Mary didn't know is that God's silence is never a sign of abandonment. Jesus knew their pain. He knew about Lazarus's death, but he also knew something they didn't know, something that would change everything. 4 days. 4 days of mourning, of despair, of darkness. Martha and Mary were lost, but then they heard that Jesus was coming. Martha ran to meet him, her eyes full of tears and her heart heavy with pain. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." John 11:21. Have you ever said that to God? If the Lord had listened to me, if the Lord had responded, none of this would have happened. But Jesus looked Martha in the eye and said something that changed everything. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live." John 11:25. It was a promise she couldn't fully comprehend at that moment. Because how can we understand life in the face of death? How to believe in light in the midst of darkness? Jesus then went to the tomb, a place of pain, of despair, of ending. Martha even tried to stop him. "Sir, it already smells bad because it's been 4 days." John 11:39. Because despair often does that. It makes you believe that there is No more hope that what is lost forever. But Jesus did not back down. "Take away the stone." His voice was firm, his eyes full of compassion and authority. And then he cried out, "Lazarus, come out!" John 11:43. And in an instant, the impossible became reality. The one who was dead got up. The darkness was broken by life. The crying was transformed into joy. But do you understand what this means? It's not just ancient history. It's a revelation that even when it seems like everything is over, Jesus still has the last word. You who fear death, who feel the terror of losing someone, who cry nights in silence, need to understand that death is not the end, not for those who know Jesus. Because where man sees an ending, God sees a new beginning. Are you afraid of death? Afraid of losing someone you love? Afraid of disappearing into oblivion? Or perhaps you fear the death of your hope, your faith, your dreams? Jesus didn't come to just comfort you. He came to show you that even when everything seems lost, He is the resurrection and the life. But why then does God sometimes allow the worst to happen? Why doesn't He stop suffering? Why doesn't He heal before death? Because there is something that can only be revealed in pain. There is a miracle that can only happen when human hope is exhausted. Today, perhaps you are standing in front of your grave, looking at something that already seems lost. But do you have the courage to allow Jesus to remove the stone? Because what is dead can live, what is lost can be restored. But you need to believe. It's not about understanding, it's about trust. And now, I want to challenge you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you need this life that only Jesus can give, comment below, "Jesus is my resurrection." Because every time you declare this, you are telling your fear that it no longer has power. And if this message touched your heart, click like and share. Because there are people who, like you, need to hear that death is not the end. But wait, do you think that's all? What if I told you that there is a secret about death that many don't know? A secret that could change everything you believe? What you discover next could transform your life forever. And even when it seems like everything is lost, when darkness envelops the mind and the heart races for no reason, there is a truth that few know. Because anxiety isn't just a feeling, it's an invisible prison, a storm that never ceases, a whirlwind of thoughts that gives no respite. And perhaps no one felt it as intensely as the disciples that night, on a boat lost in the middle of a raging storm. It was just supposed to be a crossing. The lake was calm when they set out. The wind was gentle. The stars were shining in the sky. But suddenly everything changed. The wind roared like a wild animal. The waves rose like dark walls, and the boat was overcome by the fury of the storm. Screams of fear mingled with the noise of the wind. The water invaded the boat, and each of them felt their fear growing. They were experienced fishermen. They knew the sea. But that night was different. That night was a sentence. And have you ever been in a storm like this? I'm not talking about winds and lightning. I'm talking about the storm inside your mind. That anxiety that doesn't let you sleep, that makes your heart race for no reason. The constant fear that something terrible is going to happen. You look everywhere and find no way out. This is exactly how the disciples were. Lost, terrified, desperate. And the scariest thing? Jesus was with them, but He slept. Yes, in the middle of that storm that seemed like the end, Jesus slept in the stern of the boat. How is it possible? How could He sleep while they were fighting for their lives? Maybe you've already felt this, praying, crying out, but it seems like God is silent, or worse, that He is sleeping. Fear turned to panic. Pedro, who had faced the sea so many times, was now on the verge of despair. "Lord, do you not care if we perish?" Mark 4:38. Have you ever shouted this in the midst of your anxiety? "God, don't you care? Don't you see that I'm sinking? That I can't take it anymore?" But then, something happened. Jesus stood up. His eyes were calm, His face serene. And He looked at that storm that seemed uncontrollable and said just 3 words. "Silence. Calm down." Mark 4:39. And in an instant, the wind stopped. The waves calmed down. The sea turned into a mirror of tranquility. Chaos became peace. And the disciples were astonished because it wasn't just the sea that calmed down, it was their hearts. Jesus didn't just calm the storm around them, he brought peace within them. But do you understand what this means? Maybe your life is in a storm right now. Maybe your mind is a constant battlefield, a war you can't win. Anxiety traps you in a cycle of fear, worry, and thoughts that never stop. You try to fight alone, but it seems like the more you fight, the deeper you sink. But what if I told you there was a secret you hadn't noticed? That the peace you so desire does not come from fighting your thoughts, but from surrendering everything into the hands of Jesus. Because Jesus doesn't just have the power to calm the sea, it has the power to calm your mind. And this is not just a poetic promise, it is a spiritual reality. The same Jesus who said, "Silence, calm down," to the storm, is the one who looks at you now and says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. But the big question is, are you willing to let him calm your storm? Because often in our anxiety, we try to control everything. We try to solve every problem, plan every detail, predict every risk. And when things get out of our control, panic sets in. But you need to understand, the control was never yours. And when you try to hold it all in, you end up drowning. The disciples only found peace when they let Jesus take charge, when they stopped fighting the waves and cried out to him. And you? How many times have you tried to fight alone? How many nights have you spent awake, your mind racing like an endless storm? How many times have you felt the weight of anxiety crushing your chest? But today, Jesus reveals something powerful to you. The peace you seek is not in trying to solve everything. It is in trusting him, in letting him be the captain of your boat, in allowing his voice to silence your fears. Because where the world sees chaos, he sees an opportunity to display his power. And you may ask, but why does he let the storm break out? Why does he allow me to go through this? Because there are lessons that can only be learned in the storm. There is a faith that only grows when you realize that you have no control, but that he does. And maybe, just maybe, what you are going through right now is not the end, but the beginning of a deeper faith, of a peace that the world cannot take away. Now I challenge you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you are in the middle of a storm and need Jesus to calm your heart, comment below, "Jesus, calm my storm." Because every time you declare this, you are taking a step of faith. You are letting him take control. And if this message touched you, if you know someone who needs this peace, click like and share. Because there are people who are in storms as violent as yours, and they need to know that Jesus is the only one who can bring true peace. But do you think you already understand everything? What if I told you there was something even deeper? A secret most people never realize. Something that can completely change the way you view your anxiety. What comes next could transform your life forever. And even when it seems like the judgment of others is a sentence, when every look turns into a silent accusation, there is something you need to know. Because the fear of criticism is not just an insecurity, it's an invisible prison, a wall of voices that echo, point, condemn. And perhaps no one felt this as intensely as Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was not just another man in Jericho. He was the chief tax collector. And in that city, that meant being seen as a traitor, a man who sold himself to the Roman Empire, exploiting his own people. For many, Zacchaeus was the definition of dishonesty, someone to be avoided. His eyes were constantly judged. His back carried the weight of murmurs, and each whisper was an invisible blow. He was surrounded by people, but completely alone, and maybe you've already felt this. Perhaps you know the weight of judgment. Maybe you've heard words that hurt you more than any blow. You're not good enough. You will never change. No one respects you. And even when you try to move on, it seems like these voices echo in your mind like a storm that never ends. But then, something different happened in Jericho. The city was in an uproar. Jesus was coming, the one everyone was talking about. He who healed the sick, embraced the rejected, restored the lost. Zacchaeus needed to see this man, but he wasn't just despised. He was small. Small in the eyes of the people and small in stature. And in that sea of people, he had no space, no one would make way for him. Because for them, Zacchaeus didn't deserve it. But there was something inside him that couldn't be stifled, a hunger, a desperate need to see Jesus. Then he ran ahead of the crowd. Yes, a rich, powerful man, running like a child. And more than that, he climbed a fig tree, something unthinkable for a man of his position. But for Zacchaeus, it no longer mattered what others thought, because when the pain of being rejected becomes unbearable, you cling to any hope, and from above, he waited, looking, searching, until finally among the crowd he saw it, Jesus. Each step seemed like an eternity, but then something happened that no one expected. Jesus stopped. He looked up, and in that sea of faces, he called the name Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, come down quickly. I want to stay at your house today. Luke 19:5. Do you understand the impact of this? In front of everyone, Jesus chose the one everyone rejected. Jesus did not look at Zacchaeus' past. He didn't look at the mistakes, the judgments, the labels. He looked at the heart, because where the world sees a traitor, Jesus sees a soul in search of redemption. And as Zacchaeus came down from the tree, the crowd murmured, "How can he stay in a sinner's house?" Because that's what judgment does. He accuses, points out, belittles, and perhaps you know that voice well. Perhaps you have already felt the weight of being misunderstood, criticized, condemned before even being heard. But what no one understood is that what Jesus did for Zacchaeus that day, he also does for you, because even when the world judges you, Jesus calls you. Even when everyone turns their back on you, he accepts you. And it doesn't matter what you've done, who you were, or how they label you. In the eyes of Jesus, you are loved, you are worthy. And there, in Zacchaeus' house, something changed. The man who was hated by everyone stood up and said, "Lord, I will give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have robbed anyone, I will return 4 times as much." Luke 19:8. Do you notice? Jesus did not need to condemn Zacchaeus. He didn't need to point out his mistakes, because true love does not condemn, it transforms. The acceptance that Zacchaeus found in Jesus was so powerful that it changed him, because true repentance comes not from guilt, but from love. But now I ask you, how many times have you let the fear of criticism paralyze you? How many times have you stopped living, expressing yourself, trying something new, because you were afraid of what others would think? How many times have you hidden who you are, trying to please people who never really cared about you? But today, Jesus reveals something profound to you. What others think of you does not define who you are. Their voice is not the truth about your life, because where they see failure, Jesus sees purpose. Where they see a sinner, Jesus sees someone seeking redemption. And maybe you've tried to be perfect, to please everyone, to be accepted, and still you always end up feeling rejected. But do you know why? Because true acceptance doesn't come from others. It comes from Jesus. When you understand that you are loved by him, the voices of judgment lose their power, because the opinion of those who didn't create you will never be stronger than the voice of those who formed you. So today I challenge you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you have been carrying the weight of judgment, comment now, "Jesus, I accept your love." Because every time you declare this, you are breaking the chains of fear. You are declaring that the love of Jesus is greater than any criticism. And if this message touched you, if you know someone who needs to understand that they are loved, share this video. Because there are many people who live in fear of judgment, and they need to know that Jesus calls them by name, just as he called Zacchaeus. But do you think you already understand everything? What if I told you there was something even deeper, a secret that most never realize, something that could forever change how you view judgment, criticism, and the love of Jesus? What comes next could transform your life forever. And even when it seems that doubt dominates, when the inner voice screams that you are not capable, that you are not enough, there is a truth that few understand. Because insecurity is not just a weakness. It's an invisible chain that imprisons dreams, that suffocates your voice, that makes you hide when you should shine. But you are not alone, and perhaps no one felt this as intensely as Moses. Moses was not just a chosen man. He was a broken man, someone who carried the weight of a past of escape, of failure, of abandonment. He grew up as a prince in Egypt, but one mistake changed everything. He fled to the desert, where he became a simple shepherd. Years passed, and the fire that once burned in his heart seemed to have gone out. And it is exactly there, in the desert of insecurity, that God finds him. Imagine the scene. Imagine the dry wind blowing, the crushing silence of a lifeless place. Moses is tending the sheep, his life now limited to the ordinary, the safe. But suddenly, something catches your attention. A burning bush, but not consumed. He approaches, and a voice echoes, "Moses! Moses!" And he responds, "Here I am." Exodus 3:4. But was he really there? Or was that response automatic? A reaction from someone who was used to responding without belief? Because God didn't just call him. He called him to a mission that challenged everything Moses believed himself to be. Free the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. But Moses did not see a mission. He saw their flaws. Who am I to go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Exodus 3:11. Do you understand this? It's not just a question. It's the cry of someone who doesn't feel capable, that you see yourself as too small, too weak, too imperfect. Because insecurity turns even God's calling into a burden. And maybe you know that voice. The one that tells you that you're not good enough, that you don't have what it takes, that you won't make it. Perhaps you have felt like Moses, looking at an opportunity and thinking, "Who am I?" But God's voice does not remain silent. He doesn't just give Moses a mission. He gives you a promise. "I will be with you." Exodus 3:12. But even in the face of this, Moses' fear does not disappear. "Sir, I have never been eloquent. Not before, not now. I am heavy of mouth and tongue." Exodus 4:10. Because that's what insecurity does. It blinds you to what God can do and makes you focus only on what you can't do. But God does not abandon him. Who gave man a mouth? Who made him deaf or dumb? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with his mouth and teach him what to say. Exodus 4:11-12. Do you notice? God did not choose Moses for his abilities. He chose you despite your flaws. Because what he seeks is not perfection. It is obedience. And that's what you need to understand. Insecurity is a lie that tries to erase the calling that God has placed on you. It tells you that you are not enough, but the truth is, with God, you will always be more than enough. Because it's not about what you can do. It's about what he can do through you. But how many times have you hidden behind this insecurity? How many opportunities have you missed out of fear of not being good enough? How many times has God called you, but you responded, "I can't. I don't know. I'm not capable." But today, Jesus reveals something profound to you. He doesn't call you because you're perfect. He calls you because he is perfect. He doesn't choose you for your ability, but for your availability. Because what he can do through someone who surrenders is greater than any failure, greater than any limitation. And in that desert, Moses discovered something that changed his life forever. That where he saw weakness, God saw potential. That where he saw limitations, God saw opportunities. And maybe you need to hear this today, that your insecurity is not the end. That what you see as failure, God can transform into purpose. But that doesn't mean the fear will disappear. Moses still trembled, still doubted. But the difference is that he decided to obey, even though he was afraid. And what happened? A man who saw himself as incapable became the liberator of a nation. Because when you surrender your weakness into God's hands, it becomes a powerful weapon. Now I ask you, how long will you let insecurity paralyze you? How long will you believe the lie that you are not enough? Because the truth is that God has already empowered you, and he is calling you today. So I challenge you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you have struggled with insecurity, comment now, "Jesus, I trust in you." Because every time you declare this, you are breaking the chains of doubt. You are saying that it is not about your ability, but about the power of God in you. And if this message touched you, share this video. Because there are many who live prisoners of insecurity, who hide, who give up before even trying. And they need to know that God calls them, that God empowers them. But do you think that's all? What if I told you that there is something that almost no one notices in the story of Moses? That the greatest lesson was not about what he did, but about what God revealed through him. What comes next could forever transform the way you view your failures, your weaknesses, your limitations. What you hear now may be what your soul has always needed to understand. And even when it seems like you're on the edge of the abyss, when the fear of failure paralyzes you and the voice of doubt screams louder, there's something you need to understand. Because failure is not the end. But for Pedro, at that moment it seemed to be. Imagine the scene. The sky darkened. The violent winds whipped the boat. The disciples are terrified, rowing against a relentless storm. But then, amid the chaos, they see something impossible. A figure walking on water. Fear turns into dread. "It's a ghost!" they scream. But the voice that echoes over the roar of the waves is no ordinary voice. "It's me. Don't be afraid." Matthew 14:27. And it is Pedro, always impetuous, who dares to respond. "Lord, if it is you, send me to meet you on the water." Matthew 14:28. Do you understand this? Amidst the terror, Pedro makes a request that defies logic. It's not just courage, it's a faith that seems unshakable until it isn't. Jesus says just one word, "Come," and Pedro, with his heart racing, leaves the boat. Your feet touch the choppy surface and the impossible happens. He walks, step after step, eyes fixed on Jesus. But then the wind seems stronger, the waves seem taller, fear takes over, and Pedro sinks. "Lord, save me," he screams, his voice muffled by the waters, and immediately Jesus extends his hand. Immediately. Not later, not when Pedro deserved it, but in the exact split second he cried out. "O you of little faith," says Jesus as he pulls him up, "why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:31. And maybe you've already felt like Pedro. There have been times when your faith seemed unshakable. You dared to dream, you dared to believe, you got off the boat, but then the storm came. Fear whispered that you weren't good enough, that you wouldn't make it, and you sank. Maybe it was a project that failed, a relationship that fell apart, a dream that seemed impossible. Or maybe it's the constant fear of failing, of not being enough, that stops you from even trying. Because failure is not just an event. It's a voice that tells you that you will never be able to. But Jesus reveals something to you today. You didn't fail because you sank. You failed when you took your eyes off him. And yet he was there, with his hand outstretched. Because true, failure is not falling. It's staying down. Pedro sank, yes, but he also walked on water. He experienced the supernatural because, even though he was scared, he chose to get out of the boat. And maybe that's the lesson you need. That failure does not define you. That every fall is an opportunity to be lifted up by Jesus. But there is something even deeper. Do you realize that Jesus never criticized Peter for wanting to walk on water? He didn't say, "Peter, this is dangerous." He didn't call him crazy for trying, because God does not discourage your faith. It just fixes your focus. And perhaps, today, what is missing is not courage, but focus. You have been looking at the storm, for what others say, for your limitations, for your fears, and that's why you've been sinking. But today, Jesus calls you to look again at him. Because where you see weakness, he sees potential. Where you see failure, he sees growth. But how does this change your life? Are you afraid to try again? Afraid to believe, to trust, to dream? Why did it fail before? Peter also failed, but he didn't stay on the boat. He chose to try. And even though he sank, he was the only one who experienced the power of walking on water. What are you missing out on because you are afraid of failing? What dreams have you been stifling because you think you're not capable? What opportunities have you ignored because you believe you won't succeed? Today, Jesus extends his hand to you. He is not calling you to a life without challenges. He is calling you to a life where the impossible becomes possible when you focus on him. And I challenge you now. If this word touched your heart, comment. I choose to leave the boat. Because every time you declare this, you are saying that you will not let fear dominate you. That even if you fall, Jesus will be there to lift you up. But that's not all. If you know someone who is trapped by the fear of failure, someone who has given up on their dreams, share this video. Because that word is not just for you. It's for everyone who needs to remember that failure is not the end. But do you think you know this story? What if I told you that there is something that almost no one notices? That the real miracle was not Peter walking on the water, but something much deeper that happened there. What comes next will forever transform the way you view failure, doubt, and even faith. What you hear may be what your soul has always needed to understand. And even when doubt seems to whisper louder than hope, there's something you need to know. Because what you think is weakness may be the point where God wants to reveal your strength. But for Thomas, that day, it was just darkness. A darkness he couldn't ignore. Imagine the scenario. The other disciples gathered, the gleam of joy in their eyes. "We have seen the Lord," they said excitedly. But for Thomas, those words were just an empty echo. How could they be sure? How could they believe in something so impossible? He knew death. He had seen the body of Jesus nailed, pierced, locked in a tomb. He knew the end, or thought he did. And then, the words that would define him forever escaped his lips. "Unless I see the prints of the nails in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." John 20:25. Have you ever felt this way? Surrounded by people full of faith, people who seem to see the impossible while you drown in doubt. Thomas was not a skeptic by nature. He was a disciple, a faithful follower. But the pain of loss, the trauma of death, the silence that followed, the chaos, it all broke him. Because sometimes faith is not shaken by the unknown. She is shaken by what we already know, for the losses we have already suffered, for the prayers that were not answered. Thomas did not doubt Jesus. He doubted himself of your ability to believe again, because believing is exposing yourself. It's taking the risk of being disappointed. And for him, the pain of believing again and being hurt again was unbearable. 8 days, 8 long days in which he carried this anguish. But then, without warning, Jesus appeared. The doors were locked, but that didn't stop him, because nothing can stop Jesus from reaching those who are trapped in the darkness of doubt. And Jesus, instead of rebuking Thomas, called him by name. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out and place your hand in my side. Stop doubting and believe." John 20:27. Do you understand this? Jesus did not reject Thomas because of his doubt. He didn't shame him. He found him right where he was, in pain, in uncertainty, in fear. Because what many don't realize is that doubt is not the opposite of faith. Fear is not the opposite of trust. They are often the starting point. And at that moment, something in Thomas broke. Not your faith, but your resistance. Because he realized that even in his unbelief, Jesus loved him. Even in his weakness, Jesus accepted him. And he didn't need to play anymore. No more proof was needed. He just fell to his knees and declared, "My Lord and my God," John 20:28. But then Jesus said something that resonates to this day, something that might be for you. "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John 20:29. Have you ever thought that your doubt could be the point where God wants to meet you? That he is not waiting for you to have perfect faith. He is waiting for you to have sincere faith. A faith that doesn't pretend to be okay when it isn't. That doesn't hide the wounds. Who doesn't ignore the questions. Because faith is not the absence of doubts. Faith is the choice to trust, even when doubts scream. And maybe today you are like Thomas. You've prayed, you've hoped, you've believed, but now you're tired. You look around you and see people full of faith, people who seem unshakable, while you carry questions that no one can answer. But Jesus reveals something to you today. He's not calling you to pretend he doesn't have doubts. He is calling you to bring them to him, to let him show you that his presence is greater than any uncertainty, that his promises are stronger than your fears, Because faith that is never tested is faith that is never strengthened. The faith that never faces doubt is a superficial faith. But the faith that clings to Jesus, even in the midst of questions, is a faith that cannot be destroyed. So I ask you, where is your faith today? Hiding behind your doubts? Suffocated by fears? Do you think Jesus can't accept you because you have too many questions? Thomas had it, but that didn't stop him from becoming one of the greatest testimonies of God's grace and patience. And now it's your turn. Will you remain stuck in doubt? Or will you do like Thomas and bring your questions to Jesus? Will you allow him to meet you right where you are? If this message spoke to you, comment, "I choose to believe," because it's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting who the answer is. And share this word with someone you know is struggling, someone who once believed but is now lost in uncertainty. Because what seems like doubt can be the starting point for the most powerful faith you've ever known. But that's not all. Do you think you know the story of Thomas? That it's just about doubt? What if I told you there was something much deeper? Here, that what Jesus did for Thomas reveals a truth that can transform your life. What comes next is something few understand, but it could change everything. What you hear may be what your soul has always hoped to find. And even when it seems like darkness is all that's left, there's a small voice you may not have heard yet. A voice that whispers in the silence, in the void. But Elijah couldn't hear anything. Not at that moment. He ran, fled, desperate. Each step was heavier than the last, and the desert seemed endless. Because it wasn't just a physical escape, it was an escape from himself. Imagine that man, Elijah, the prophet who defied the prophets of Baal, who saw the fire of God descend from heaven, now hiding in a cave. Because the public victory was not enough to silence private fear. Jezebel's threat echoed in his mind. "May the gods punish me if I don't do the same with your life as you did with the prophets." 1 Kings 19:2. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever had moments where you seemed to be on top, where everyone admired you, but inside, you were falling apart? Elijah had seen the power of God, but now, instead of strength, all he felt was overwhelming dread. And when fear takes over, it distorts everything. It makes you forget who you are. It makes you doubt everything you've ever experienced. And he ran to the desert for isolation. Because pain has that power. She convinces you that you are alone, that no one would understand, that God is silent. And when he could no longer run, he fell exhausted under a juniper tree, a lonely tree in the middle of nowhere. And his words echoed like a choked cry. "Enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." 1 Kings 19:4. Can you feel the pain behind these words? The despair of someone who has lost meaning, who thinks everything is over, who sees himself as a failure. Elijah didn't just want to run away. He wanted to disappear. Because for him, the pain was unbearable. But as he slept, as he tried to escape even his dreams, a gentle hand touched him, an angel, and a calm voice. "Get up and eat." 1 Kings 19:5. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't an accusation. It was silent care. A simple meal prepared by God. Because before Elijah could hear the voice of God, he needed to regain his strength. But Elijah still didn't understand. He ate, drank, and lay down again. Because when the soul is hurt, even the act of moving forward seems impossible. But the angel touched him again, with patience. "Get up and eat, for the way is too long for you." 1 Kings 19:7. Do you realize what's going on here? Elijah was running away, but God was following him. Even when he hid, God was by his side. And maybe you need to hear this today, that even when you think you are alone, God is there. Even when you don't feel anything, he is watching over you. And, strengthened by that food, Elijah walked for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb. And there, hiding in a cave, he finally came face to face with God, but not in the way I expected. There was a strong wind that shattered the mountains. But God was not in the wind. There was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. There was fire, but God was not in the fire. And then, a soft whisper. Elijah covered his face, because sometimes God doesn't speak in the midst of chaos. he speaks in silence, in the space where you least expect it. Because the voice that transforms is not the one that screams, it is the one that touches your heart. And then God asked a question. What are you doing here, Elijah? 1 Kings 19:9. It wasn't an accusation. It was a call to the heart. Because God didn't need the answer. Elijah needed it. He needed to understand that he was hiding not just from Jezebel, but from himself. Have you ever hidden like this? Have you ever lost yourself in pain, fear, despair? Have you ever convinced yourself that no one cares? That no one understood, that not even God was listening to you? Elijah thought this, but he was wrong. And God didn't just restore Elijah. He resented, gave him a new mission, a new direction, because where Elijah saw the end, God saw a new beginning. And maybe that's what you need to understand today, that your desert is not the end, that your cave is not your tomb, that your silence is not abandonment of God, because Jesus reveals to you that where you see loneliness, he sees a place of meeting. Where you see despair, he sees a chance to strengthen you. He doesn't condemn you for being afraid. He meets you in the middle of it. So I ask you, what are you doing there, trapped in pain? Don't you realize that God is on your side? That he sustains you even when you don't realize it? That he calls you by name even when you think no one cares? If this word spoke to you, comment, Jesus is with me. State this, not just as a comment, but as a truth that you choose to believe. And if you know someone who is feeling this way, someone who is lost in an emotional desert, share this message with them. But that's not all. Why do you think you know this story? That it's just about Elijah's despair? What if I told you there was something much deeper here? Something that few people understand, but that can transform your life. What comes next is not just a story. It's a revelation, a key to your soul. Don't leave now. What you're about to hear may be what you always hope to understand. And even when everything seems out of control, when fear dominates and the feeling that everything is about to fall apart becomes unbearable, there is a truth that few realize. And that is exactly where many get lost. Because the need to control is like an invisible but powerful prison. And no one understood this better than that young man. The rich young man. He had everything. Money, power, status. In the eyes of the world, he was blessed. But inside, a deep emptiness, a restlessness that consumed him. Because there was a voice inside him that whispered, what if all this isn't enough? What if you lose it all? And then he did what many would never do. He went to Jesus. At that moment, surrounded by the crowd, he approached, but not like the others. Not to ask for healing, not to ask for deliverance, but to seek certainty. Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Matthew 19:16. Do you realize what is behind this question? It's not just a theological doubt. It is the cry of a soul desperate for safety. Because even with all his possessions, he felt insecure. Even with all his wealth, he was a prisoner of fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of not being enough. And Jesus, with that look that crossed the soul, responded. First, he spoke of the commandments. Thou shalt not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You will not steal. And the young man, with desperate anxiety, said, I have saved all this. What do I still lack? Matthew 19:20. Have you ever been like this? Trying to do everything right, following all the rules, hoping that would be enough to bring you peace. Trying to control every detail of your life, believing that if you do everything right, then nothing will go wrong. But deep down, still feeling that emptiness, that anguish that won't go away. And it was then that Jesus revealed the secret, not just for the rich young man, but for all of us. If you want to be perfect, go. Sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. So come and follow me. Matthew 19:21. At that moment, the young man's world collapsed because he expected a magic formula, an answer he could control. But Jesus revealed that the problem wasn't what he had, it was what had him. His heart was trapped by the fear of loss, the desire for control, and he walked away sad. Because even before Jesus, the fear of losing was stronger than the desire to live in freedom. But what about you? How many times have you held on to something, afraid of losing it? How often does your anxiety come from this desire to control every detail of your life? Your future, your health, your finances, your relationships? You make plans, establish rules, and when something gets out of control, panic takes over. But Jesus reveals something powerful to you. True control is not in holding everything tightly. It's about entrusting everything to Him. Because what the rich young man didn't understand is that Jesus didn't want to take anything from him. Jesus wanted to set him free. Free you from the prison of insecurity, the anxiety of always having to guarantee tomorrow. Because while you try to control everything, you become a slave to fear. But when you give control to Jesus, you find true peace. But you may ask, how do I do this? How do I trust? How do I surrender control when everything inside me screams for safety? And this is where Jesus reveals the secret to you. It's not about never being afraid. It's about knowing who is with you when fear arrives. It's about understanding that even when you don't have control, He does. And what He has for you is far greater than anything you can hold with your own hands. Look at the rich young man. He walked away sad because he couldn't let go of what held him back. But you don't have to do the same. You don't need to live as a prisoner of fear, anxiety, the need to guarantee everything. You can choose to trust, but that doesn't mean you'll never worry again. It means that when the worry comes, you will know who to give it to. When fear hits, you will know where to find peace. Because Jesus doesn't ask you to pretend you're not afraid. He invites you to bring that fear to Him. And I ask you, what are you holding so tightly today? What do you fear losing? Your job? Your family? Your health? Your future? What if I told you that Jesus can do more with what you give Him than you could ever do by holding it alone? If this message spoke to your heart, if you feel that you need to give control to Jesus, comment now. I trust in you, Jesus, because this isn't just a comment, it's a decision. It is a choice to no longer be a prisoner of fear. It is a declaration that you will no longer live in the anguish of trying to control everything. But wait, there is something that almost no one realizes. What if I told you that what Jesus really wants to reveal goes far beyond that? What you will hear now could transform your life forever. And even when it seems like everything is in place, when you look at others and feel like you are never enough, there is a silent pain that gnaws away, the pain of constant comparison. You do your best, but it seems like there is always someone better, more talented, more loved, more recognized. And that comparison is an invisible prison that imprisons your peace, steals your joy, and leaves you feeling lost. But few understand how deep this wound really is. And no one knew this as intensely as Cain. Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve, the man who had everything to be a blessing, but who carried an invisible struggle within himself. Next to him, his brother Abel, the one who always seemed to do everything right. Abel offered his sacrifices to God, and the Lord accepted them with pleasure. But Cain, his sacrifice did not receive the same acceptance. And the question echoing in Cain's mind was brutal. Why isn't mine enough? What's wrong with me? Have you ever felt this way? You try your best, you do your best, but no one seems to notice. It seems that others are always better, more loved, more successful. And then the comparison arises. And this comparison becomes a pain that consumes, a wound that does not heal. Cain looked at Abel, and instead of seeing his brother, he saw a mirror that reflected his own insufficiency. And this pain started to grow. It turned into anger, into bitterness, because it wasn't just a matter of sacrifice. It was a question of identity. Cain didn't feel seen. He didn't feel loved. And the more he looked at Abel, the more he hated himself, because Abel's every victory was a reminder of his own sense of failure. But then God, in His infinite mercy, approached Cain, and He said something that few really understand. Why are you angry? Why is your face cast down? If you do good, will you not be accepted? Genesis 4:6-7. Do you notice? God was not rejecting Cain. He was calling Cain to something deeper, because the problem was not the sacrifice itself. It was Cain's heart. It was the poison of comparison, the anguish of trying to be someone he wasn't. But Cain didn't understand. He didn't hear the voice of love that called him to a new chance. Instead, he sank deeper into darkness, and consumed by anger and jealousy, he called his brother to the field. And there, in the silence of that plain, the hatred he felt for himself turned against Abel, and Cain killed him. Do you notice? What started as a comparison, as an internal pain, turned into a tragedy. Because the comparison is like that. It starts as a doubt whispered in the mind, but turns into a prison that destroys your peace, steals your joy, and sometimes even destroys the relationships around you. But you may ask, why did God accept Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's? Because God doesn't just look at what you do, He looks at the heart. Abel offered the best, with a heart full of faith and gratitude. But Cain offered something just to fulfill an obligation, a soulless gesture, a lifeless ritual. And that's what comparison does. She turns everything into an obligation. You no longer work because you love what you do, but because you want to prove that you are good enough. You no longer love others freely, because the fear of not being loved controls you. You no longer celebrate your achievements because you always think you could have done more. But here's the truth that few realize. God doesn't compare you. He never compares you. He sees you. He knows you. He knows every tear, every fight, every invisible battle you face. And He doesn't love you because you're better than someone else. He loves you for being you. Cain did not need to be Abel. He just needed to be himself, with a sincere heart, with true faith. But he didn't understand that. And maybe you didn't understand it until today either. You look at other people's lives and feel small. You see the achievements of others and feel like you are falling behind. But comparison is a lie that steals your identity. Jesus reveals to you that you are loved exactly as you are, that God does not measure you by what you do, but by who you are. And what are you? You are a son. You are a daughter. You are loved. But there is a decision you need to make today. Will you continue to look at others and wallow in comparison? Or will you choose to trust that the God who created you has a unique plan for you? Because while you look away, you miss what God has placed before you. While you try to be like others, you forget to live the life God gave you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you are tired of living trapped in comparison, comment now, Jesus, I am unique in your eyes. Because this isn't just a comment, it is a declaration of freedom. It's a choice to live the life that God gave you without comparing yourself, without feeling less, without hiding in the shadow of others. But wait, do you think this story ends here? What if I told you that there is something that almost no one notices, something that reveals a deep secret about the heart of God and the power of forgiveness? What comes next could transform your life forever, and even when it seems like everything is under control, there is a battle that many face in silence, a fight that no one sees, but that consumes them inside. It's the weight of trying to be perfect. Do you know this pain? The feeling that no matter how much you do, it's never enough? That there is always a flaw, a weakness, something that could have been better? But few know how much it destroys, and even fewer realize that this pain is not new. It is echoed in the story of someone who knew this burden, the prodigal son. There was a father, a man full of love, full of grace, and he had 2 children. The youngest, restless, dissatisfied, believed that life was elsewhere, far from his father's house. One day he decided he couldn't wait any longer. He asked for his share of the inheritance, and with a heart full of expectations, he left the home that loved him to seek his own happiness. Have you ever felt this way? As if happiness was always somewhere else? As if, to be truly free, you need to step away, free yourself from everything? The prodigal son thought that freedom lay in living his own desires, and for a while he believed he had found what he was looking for. Parties, friends, pleasure. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection is an illusion that soon shatters. And then the money ran out. Friends disappeared. The party turned into solitude. What seemed like freedom turned out to be a prison. And alone he found himself wallowing in misery, working as a servant, feeding pigs and craving their food. The one who dreamed of being more was now less than he had ever imagined. But there was something even more painful. It wasn't just hunger. It wasn't just loneliness. It was shame. The shame of knowing I had failed, that he had wasted everything, that he had become someone he didn't even recognize. Do you know this shame? When you look at yourself and don't like what you see, and in the midst of this darkness, he remembered his father from the house where there was love, where there was acceptance. But how to get back? How can you allow yourself to be loved after everything you've done? Maybe you've already felt this way, as if God were distant, as if forgiveness was something you didn't deserve. But even sunk in guilt, the prodigal son made a decision. He decided to return, not as a son, but as a servant, because he believed he no longer deserved to be loved, that he no longer deserved to be called a son. And maybe you think so too, that your past is too big, that your mistakes are too deep. But there is something you need to understand. Jesus reveals to you that the Father's love is greater than your mistakes, that his forgiveness is not based on who you were, but on who he is. When the prodigal son was still far away, his father saw him, and full of compassion, he ran to him. Do you notice? The father didn't wait for his son to justify himself. He didn't wait for explanations. He didn't wait for perfect repentance. He ran, because God's love does not wait for perfection. It achieves it. And that son who was lost was welcomed with a hug, dirty, hurt, ashamed, but loved. His father didn't question him about the lost money. He didn't blame him for his choices. Instead, he called his servants and said, "Bring your best clothes, put a ring on your finger, sandals on your feet. Let's have a party, because my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Luke 15:22-24. Do you notice? The son thought he needed to be perfect to be accepted again. But the father accepted him simply because he was his son. Maybe you are carrying this weight today, trying to be perfect to deserve God's love, trying to do everything right to feel worthy. But what you need to understand is that you don't have to be perfect. You just need to go back. But there is a truth that few realize. The prodigal son was not the only one to carry this weight. There was the older brother, the one who always stayed, the one who always did everything right. But in his heart, he carried another prison, the prison of pride. When he saw the party his father threw for his lost brother, he didn't celebrate. He rebelled. "I always served you. I never disobeyed you. And I never got a party." Do you notice? While one son thought he would never be good enough, the other thought his effort deserved reward. Both were arrested, one for guilt, the other for pride. But the father, full of grace, also went out to meet his eldest son. "My son, everything I have is yours." Jesus reveals to you that God's love is not gained by performance, nor lost by failure. It is a constant love, a love that embraces you even when you make mistakes, and that reminds you that there is nothing you can do to be loved more, because you are already loved to the fullest. Maybe you are like the prodigal son, thinking that God would no longer accept you, or perhaps as the oldest child, trying to earn what is already yours. But the call is the same. Return to the Father. There is no shame that he cannot cover. There is no pride that he cannot break. If this word spoke to your heart, if you are tired of trying to be perfect, or living in guilt, comment now. "Jesus, I return to your embrace." But what if I told you that there is something that almost no one notices? Something that reveals a deep secret about the heart of God? What comes next could transform your life forever. And even when it feels like you're being ignored, when every prayer sounds like an echo lost in the void, there's a truth that many don't see. Because God's silence is never absence. And perhaps no one has felt this as intensely as a woman who faced the despair of indifference, the despair of crying out and not being heard. The Canaanite woman, she was not one of the people of Israel. She was a foreigner, someone who, according to the standards of the time, was not entitled to God's favor. But his pain knew no boundaries. His daughter was terribly tormented, dominated by an evil spirit. And when pain hits someone you love, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. You just want an answer, a way out, a hope. Then she heard about Jesus, the man who healed the blind, who freed the oppressed, who restored lives. She knew he was her only hope, and with a broken heart, she found him. He cried out with all the strength of his soul, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." But what happened next was silent, an overwhelming silence. Jesus did not respond, and maybe you know this pain. Pray, cry, pour out your heart, and hear nothing, feeling that your words are lost, that God is distant, that your pain is ignored. And while she cried out, Jesus' disciples were disturbed. They asked him to send her away. To them, she was just a nuisance. Have you ever felt this way? As if your pain were a burden to others? As if, in addition to God's silence, you still need to deal with the contempt of those around you? But even in the face of rejection, even in the face of silence, she didn't give up. She continued. Because when your pain is greater than your pride, you don't care about appearing desperate. Finally, Jesus spoke. But his words were not encouraging. "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." It was as if the door was being closed in. His face. But this woman, this desperate mother, didn't move away. She moved even closer. He knelt before him and cried out, "Lord, help me." But then Jesus' words were even harsher. "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Imagine that. Not only was she not attended to immediately, she was compared to someone without rights, to someone unworthy. Have you ever felt this way? As if your faith wasn't enough? As if your prayers are unworthy of God's attention? But here's what few realize. This woman was not offended. He didn't move away, because she knew that pride had no place in the face of such a great need. And even though she was called puppy, she responded with a faith that defied all expectations. "Yes, Lord, but even puppies eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Do you understand the power of this response? She recognized that she deserved nothing, but he knew that even a crumb of Jesus' grace would be enough to transform his life. And at that moment, the silence broke. Resistance dissolved. Jesus looked at her and said, "Woman, great is your faith. Be it as you desire." And in that instant, her daughter was healed. Do you notice? The Canaanite woman faced God's silence. She faced the disciples' contempt. She faced words that seemed like rejection. But she didn't give up, because their faith was not based on merit, but on who Jesus is. And maybe you are there, tired of crying, thinking that God doesn't hear you, that the sky is closed, that your prayers are ignored. But Jesus reveals to you that God's silence is not a refusal. It is often a test, not to prove something to him, but to reveal something in you. Because true faith is not the one that receives an immediate response. It is the one that remains, even when everything seems contrary. Have you ever given up, praying because you didn't see answers? Have you ever thought that maybe God was too far away to hear? But today, he tells you, persist. It's not that he doesn't see you. It's not that he doesn't love you. But there is something powerful that is only revealed in perseverance. But there is something even deeper that many don't realize in this story. When Jesus said he came for the lost sheep of Israel, he was testing not only that woman's faith, but showing a truth that would change the world. Because in his answer, Jesus not only revealed the power of faith, but also anticipated his purpose to reach all, Jews and Gentiles. Do you notice? What seemed like rejection was actually a door being opened for grace to reach us all. And what seemed like silence was actually an opportunity for faith to be revealed. So if you've been crying out, and it seems like heaven is silent, don't give up. If even the crumbs of Jesus' grace are powerful to transform a life, how much more the fullness of his love that he wants to pour out on you. But now I need to ask you, do you really believe that God's silence is a rejection? What if I told you that often it is exactly in the silence that he is closest? That he is waiting to see if your faith is a faith that takes offense or a faith that endures? If this word spoke to your heart, if you are tired of praying without seeing an answer, comment now. I don't give up. Jesus, I trust in you. But wait, there is something even deeper that you need to understand, because what comes next isn't just a story of faith. It's a revelation that can completely transform the way you relate to God. Are you ready to find out? And even when it seems like everything around you is silent, when pain echoes in your mind and thoughts become your worst enemy, there is a truth that few understand. Because the fiercest battle you will face isn't outside, it's inside your mind. It's an invisible war, a prison where the screams are silent and the fears are gigantic. And perhaps no one experienced this war as terrifyingly. As a young man who everyone saw as lost, but who Jesus saw in a way that no one else did. He had no known name. To the people of his town, he was just the young man possessed, a boy who was always tormented, thrown to the ground by forces he couldn't control, a dominated mind, a prisoner soul. His father, desperate, tried everything. And every time the attacks came, the boy struggled, foamed at the mouth. His eyes lost their shine. He looked like a broken puppet, moved by a cruel force. Have you ever felt like you lost control of your own mind? That your thoughts become your worst enemy? That fear, guilt, and anxiety whisper incessantly until you feel suffocated? That young man lived this war every day. And his father carried an even greater burden, because there is no greater pain than seeing someone you love being destroyed before your eyes, and not being able to do anything about it. But then he heard about Jesus, the master who healed the sick, who freed the oppressed, who gave sight to the blind, and a desperate hope arose in his heart. He took his son to the disciples, but they couldn't do anything. What do you do when, even those who say they have faith, seem powerless in the face of your pain? But that day, something was about to change. Jesus was there, and when the father approached, carrying his tormented son, his voice was a mix of pain and hope. "Master, I brought my son to your disciples, but they could not cure him." And his words revealed more than frustration with the disciples. It was the cry of a soul tired of fighting alone. Jesus looked at him, and then he asked them to bring the boy. And at that moment, the evil spirit, which always dominated him, tried to destroy him again. The young man was thrown to the ground, writhing, as if he was being torn apart from the inside. Have you ever seen your life being destroyed while you can do nothing? Have you ever felt trapped by thoughts that crush you? Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been going on?" And the father replied with tears in his eyes, "From childhood. He often threw him into fire and water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us, if you can." Words that revealed a wounded faith, a worn-out hope. But Jesus responded with something that changed everything. If you can, everything is possible to him who believes. Do you understand? It was not a question of Jesus' power. It was a question of that man's faith. And at that moment, the father broke. Because sometimes you think you believe, but your pain is so great that your faith mixes with doubt. He cried out, "I believe, help me in my unbelief." Have you ever felt this way? Wanting to believe but being crushed by doubt? Trying to have faith but being pulled by thoughts that tell you nothing will change? This father became the mirror of our internal struggle. Because the biggest battle isn't what's outside, it's what happens in your mind. But Jesus did not reject him. He didn't judge him. Instead, he looked at the young man, at the one everyone said was lost. And with authority, he ordered, "Mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And immediately the young man twitched, screamed, and then fell to the ground, motionless. Many thought he was dead, because sometimes when Jesus intervenes in your life, it seems like everything ends before being restored. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up. And that young man, who had previously been a walking prison, was free. His mind was at peace. Do you realize what this means? It doesn't matter how chaotic your mind is, no matter how many negative thoughts try to destroy you. When Jesus speaks, everything changes, because he doesn't just silence the storm around you. He silences the storm within you. But now I need to ask you, and you? Where is your war? Is it against fear? The anxiety that doesn't let you sleep? The guilt that accuses you? The thoughts that tell you that you are not enough? Do you try to believe, but it seems like something always pulls you down? Jesus reveals to you that the greatest victory begins when you admit, "I believe, but help me in my unbelief." Because it's not about having perfect faith. It's about having a sincere faith. A faith that, even wounded, still cries out for help. And now I want you to look inside yourself. See the war you have been waging, the thoughts that hold you back, the fear that paralyzes you, the voices that say you will never be free. Because today, Jesus speaks directly to your mind. He tells you that you are not a prisoner of these thoughts, that your mind is not an ownerless land, that He has the power to silence every voice that torments you. But the big question is, do you really believe it? Or do you just hope something changes? Because there is a difference. Waiting is passive. Believing is active. It's saying, Jesus, I believe. Even with doubts, even with weaknesses, I choose to trust in you. If this word spoke to your heart, if you are tired of fighting, alone in your mind, comment now, Jesus, I believe. Help me in my unbelief. If you've made it this far, it's because something powerful is happening in your life. You may not fully understand, but your heart already feels it. Every word, every story was not by chance. It was God bringing you to this moment, showing you that you are not alone, that this battle in your mind is not the end of you, that this anguish that seemed endless has a cure, but it is not a temporary cure. It is a peace that comes from heaven, a peace that Jesus offers. And now, I want to invite you to take the most important step, pray. But it's not just repeating words, it's opening your heart. It's giving Him all your pains, your anxieties, your fears, and allowing His light to enter where there was only darkness. Close your eyes now. Take a deep breath. Forget everything around you and feel that Jesus is here. He hears you. He sees you. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I stand before you now. My heart is tired, my mind is at war, but I know that you are the peace I need. I give you all my fears, all my insecurities, all the thoughts that have tormented me. Lord, I ask you, come into my mind, into my soul, and bring your peace. I recognize that alone I cannot win this battle, but in you I am more than victorious. May every voice of condemnation, of fear, of guilt be silenced now in the name of Jesus. May your voice, Lord, be stronger than any other. May I hear your love, feel your presence, and live in your peace. In the name of Jesus. Did you feel this? This peace that began to fill your heart? It is not a passing emotion. It is the presence of Jesus, touching the deepest part of your soul. And if you've come this far, it's because God is working in your life. But it doesn't end here. There is something more. What you will discover in the video that is on screen now could change your life even more. Don't leave without watching, because what comes next could be what's needed for your release. And if this message spoke to you, leave it in the comments. I made it to the end. You have no idea how this simple comment can be a declaration of faith, a mark of your journey with God. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Maybe someone you love is fighting a silent battle in their mind, and this word could be the answer they so desperately need. And subscribe to the channel. It's not just another channel. It is a place where you will find peace, direction, and words that will transform your life. Each video here is an opportunity to connect with God's love, to strengthen your faith, and to live the purpose He has for you. And I want to leave you with a verse to seal this message in your heart. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but of power, of love, and of balance. 2 Timothy 1:7. Let this be the reminder that your mind is not a prison. In Christ, you are free. Now don't miss the next video. It's a continuation of that message, and what you discover could be the key to the transformation you've been searching for. May God bless you mightily.